story about the St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is a super beautiful city. Time to time I visited, and every single time I get impressed, surprised. Yesterday I went for a quick walk in evening, and my hotel is basically situated near the Dvortsovy Bridge, and I passed that and went to Dvortsovy Square. Whereas it was slightly past 6 p.m. and the light was super beautifully highlighting the air, and the whole castle and Pete is actually walking around the street, and there was a street musician who was playing a guitar, and the sound of this guitar was spreading all around the square through the air. So organically, so beautifully, and he was actually singing the song which is in Russian, is all about the light rays are falling through the sky on the. I'll say it in Russian. Баллада Трубадура.
It was just a vagabond's song.
Around standing in a square, where singing along, we're dancing, we're even taking pictures of this. I mean, hand paintings. It was super natural, super exciting. St. Pete's is always surprises me when I come. So this is thank you for making this beautiful city as it is, because this the people who makes the city to be like it perceived. So are we okay with the not yet? So I'll wait for one minute. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. А теперь продолжу по-русски. Ну, потому что был...
Now I switch over to Russian, because for the 90% of the audience, Russian is the native language, and I'm in St. Petersburg. It's so special for me, so I will speak my native language. I'm sorry. Well, I'll rather say what my speech is not going to cover. I'm not going to speak about some top-notch technical things. I'm not going to speak about architecture or the description of architecture, saying why that was cool or why it wasn't cool. I will only share my experience in terms of some technical aspects. And I will share you with the historical background of the War of Tanks development. Because if you don't have a strategy, if you don't have a technical vision of your system, you will be just in a hot fix always. You will be in a rush always, trying to make the system stable.
And if you do know your technical strategy, you know the whole life cycle of your game, which aspects are important and which stage of existence and operation of the game, then your life will be easier, you can sleep properly, and also you will make more usable input and tool as well as platform. You could also improve library for the next game if you plan to make a next version. So box product is done when you have a release and you sell it. If it's online game, multi-user game, then life only starts when you issue a new version, because we deliver this game, they start playing, and the moment the whole process just starts, because then we can listen to the impressions, we can add some functionality, we could further evolve that game, and every day in production and every day that the game exists and is used, is played, we need to be able to trace it, to listen to them in order to think about how further we can improve it. So let us start with development. Development is a very start when we have a concept, an idea of the game, where you know what you would do, how main mechanical elements do exist already, so to say. You have a concept of that. You need to work out content and some more nuances. Here at this stage, you do not know yet the final configuration, technology, as we say, because you will have still to define some things, like, for example, speed of prototyping and changes that you're going to introduce into the game. And that is something you would do later. And iterations, fast iterations, will be adjusted later when we are ready with the final version of the product. So content, of course, we need to make sure that it is compatible with starting with the original configuration when we just lay basic engineering components, and later on, but not necessarily, but preferably. And as to tanks, tanks have some issues even today with all those compatibility things, and sometimes we have very wild solutions adopted as to prototyping, because the technique which used with prototypes is not really convenient to use when we have a final version. It takes more time, and that means that we still have to improve. It's one thing when you do it on paper, when you prototype, and when you implement it in the final version on the engine of the game, that should be running well. So when you start a new title, which you plan to keep in operation for tens of years, dozens of years, then you have to really think through all that life cycle of your game. And if we lay the correct foundation, that will be then easier. We cannot from the start know everything about scaling up or expanding the game. So there should be flexibility. For engineers, it's also good to have some flexibility, but nevertheless we need to keep that in mind. Before this, in a different room, there was a presentation about huge worlds and how to compute those worlds on a server, and the concepts which were presented there, they from Big World of 1994, they were just a little bit adjusted 10 years later, and there are still some mistakes which could have been avoided. And tanks took a different approach. They first developed a technology, and then they decided to compose a game based on that, and then they figured out that it's not quite convenient. They have to to do certain adjustments, transitions there, a script language system. It works, but the game itself is not very convenient. So if we do want to have a nice game, we should have it as focus, and engineering solutions that we would propose, we need to do it at the appropriate stage, where we generate the code, where we think about other aspects. So when we experimented for quite a long time, everything flies that we want to fly, everything drives that we want to drive, and this is the point when you have to really select appropriate engine. It is possible that the prototype will be done in Unity and the final will be running on some other, maybe even self-made or Android or somewhere else. Here you have room to play in. You can still switch to a different engine even, but when you do prototyping, you use some tools, and that should preferably be compatible with later on iterations that you need to do. So you select the engine, and what we focus on right at that stage. Well, good implementation, not really slowing down, running smoothly so that we can stay within production time. How to operate that all after launch, we have to think about that. That happened to tanks. When in 2010 they launched the game, it became immediately clear that there is no administrative support for customers. There is no possibility to look up profile. There is no possibility to edit profile, to adjust something in there, to adjust to correct any mistake which was discovered, which is unavoidable. That's why before launch it is always important to think through operational period, how we do operation after we launch. And here, everyone, of course, expects exponential growth immediately, that more and more users would want to try it and to stay playing it. And here, we have to take into account and think through a scalability strategy, how we are going to scale up. And I'm not saying that it's too early to think about the scalability. We have to keep that in mind, but we should not include everything possible at this stage. We could do scale up a bit later. You would have to rewrite quite some things, but this is the way we normally go. So we launch. Everything 3 minutes after the start works still okay. The flight is okay. So what technical team should focus on at that moment, right after they drink cognac for a successful start? They have to focus on operational tools. Operational tools, what they created before, seem to be, as a rule, not quite 100% suitable, because you have to take into account behavior of those people who started to play your game. When you really have that load, you have to provide support, and then you might need some changes in your tool set. Then this can be based on certain user cases, particular cases or examples of use, and that could be a good data that would be sufficient to think about adaptability of your tools of support, stability of operation. Issues with that happen too, but fortunately at this stage we can still deal with that quite. It's some unaccounted for factor, or maybe some small error that somehow happened to be in the program code. And if it's not a serious error, then it should be correctable. It should be manageable and improvable with the tool set that you have. And then you come to a stage where scalability strategy becomes more important. You have already started to gain experience of behavior of your game, user behavior, loads. You see approximately which elements of the systems are more loaded, what are your bottlenecks. You can see all that after you start operating the system, after the game is played. And the model of scaling up of the server engine is what I mean. One of the advantages of the engine is the linear scalability that should be there. And if we speak about endless worlds or worlds that have no borders, that in theory should be also possible to scale up sort of without any limit. So if we have this scalability, then it's okay, we can proceed. And then we start to grow. Tanks keep growing, not as fast as we call it exponential or explosive growth, but nevertheless faster than it was in 2010. Now it grows faster as a rule. So we start to have feedback from users, 100,000 online, 500,000 online, and so on. Scaling up seems to work, but suddenly you discover a problem with throughput of your data center channel. You need to ensure at least minimum latency, because people from Far East, from Kazakhstan, connect, they want to play, and they want to be able to play, decently with the sufficient throughput of traffic. And scalability model works, but we need additional throughput capacity. That is a time when you have to make full use of the strategy of scalability that you tried also to define somehow, at least the basics in the conceptual stage. Probably would not be successful from the first time that you try to make full use of strategy scalability, but nevertheless you could gradually improve. If we speak about tanks, then there is a word overload, or we can translate it great exile. Rather, it's a very difficult to translate Russian word, which is used in that game for that. It's instead of one cluster where all players are. Currently, we have a lot of distributed other clusters distributed on the map of the game, and each of that clusters can receive new gamers and provide possibility to play. We have to resolve a problem of ping in that case, but nevertheless people should be able to play at all those clusters, or if they go to see their grandma, they should be able to connect and to play from connecting to a different cluster, and the experience should be consistent. And that is why that strategy includes also a central cluster, which would not hold all the battles, but nevertheless it would coordinate and concentrate all the main information about the players, and suggestion chain of adaptability activity. The user can choose either manually or it will be done automatically which cluster is most appropriate to play the game, and then this user is transferred to that periphery cluster, and he can stay there until he stays in that location where he is currently, and that access should be granted. It's proxy, remote proxy is used for that. The central cluster knows that that user in Kazakhstan for the time being, and he or she stays there for a while until he resides there. He plays there with that local cluster. At the end of the session, it uploads data to the central computer server. So the next time he comes to this game, he can be sent to play at the nearest cluster. This strategy is an extension, so to say, of standard scalability strategy, but it is not as simple as it sounds in implementation. 500,000 online are already there, and not a single data center can provide sufficient throughput and processing capacity for all that huge number. And that is why we call it переиздец in Russian, which is really overload, or the other variant of that, as you heard. So this is still the issue that we have. We try to improve it. We still we managed to eliminate quite a number of bugs and other faults. Of course, we cannot completely exclude physical damage to, say, a cable, where quite a number of users cut off all of a sudden. That is a different matter. But it's not only tanks that we deal with. We also have to coordinate quite a number of other things. We have to manage subscriptions, relocation of players. That all is part of the thing. It is part of the technology applied to airplanes. It's part of the maritime vessels that could be used in the game. It's part of the battle strategy. There are different clusters. There are different sections of the game. But nevertheless, the basic idea is as I try to describe, as I described. This is now the time then in the development process, hypothetical game that I'm trying to describe, to apply this strategy in full and see and look at how it works. Even if it's not that urgent yet, it's a good time to try your scalability strategy, and you can also run a number of experiments to verify whether it really works perfectly. And also, performance is something that you have to focus now, because if we are in the phase of rapid growth, you will discover certain bottlenecks. Some linear scalability would not work properly, processor capacity maybe, although we should have extra capacity, we should have sufficient processing capacity to exclude it. And even subsystems are quite powerful. And if we increase by 2% performance, that would, of course, eliminate the need to have that many machines. So performance is very important, in other words, especially if the game really grows in the number of players. And that explosive growth stage, players are quite tolerant as to small mishaps, small glitches, because the game is excellent. They enjoy it, and the small things that happen, they are not really that noticeable. Because it's new, players want to to learn more about that cool game that they found, and tanks at that moment are stable, super productive, and from a technical point of view, this is quite a nice threshold, quite high level of technical readiness. And 0.3% we had super test crashes, and that is super test we apply when we test new versions in order to see performance parameters. Tanks work at 2004 computers of that year. That means client machines on average, and that is still quite competitive gameplay. And of course, there are more modern machines used.
Nevertheless, this is the time when we can invest some efforts into performance, because it's, well, stability is a little bit different from performance, because stability is something that has to be under control always. And there is one more thing that is emerging, and sometimes we just overlook it, unfortunately. This is the code manageability, which means that this is something that can be lost very easily, because it started to disappear, and all of a sudden we realized that we do not know how this thing is going to operate, so we had to do just probing tests. Now it is absolutely different. But if we were aware of manageability earlier, we would have had less challenges. Okay, so now it is the maintenance stage. We're having a stable core. Behavior is clear. We know almost everything about the heroes and about the players. We are well aware of the engineering solutions. So what should technical people deal with? First and foremost, those should deal with cost efficiency, cost effectiveness, because we have to generate revenue, we have to generate profit, because money is money. You always need money, right? Therefore, we have to make it more cost efficient. We have to make production and development more cost efficient. We have to make operations more cost efficient. This is exactly the stage when a game would generate the most revenue. So in this respect, we have to be able to cover all the costs, because those are crucial for a future increase in profit. So automation is just one of the options. As for automation, well, if we did not have time to include automation, this is the high time when we can deliver on that. Because there is some technical debt, some engineering debt. And it is high time to manage it, to manage the code and the engineering system, so as to get the game ready for a reboot. In this respect, we are approaching the retrospective aspect. Now we have had the maintenance, we have cost effectiveness. Well, for the world of tanks, cost effectiveness is that we had everything fine with servers. However, for online, we required more servers were required, and the cost efficiency was that we optimized the game by the number of servers. Over this year, we have improved the cost efficiency of servers by 25%. This is a substantial number in terms of money. Next, this is production and content optimization. This is functionality and testing, as I said. Well, retrospectively, once we have delivered on the engineering debt, on the technical debt, and we have done everything with physics, may I just tell you a story from the world of tanks? For quite a time, the idea was to make endless virtual worlds, seamless worlds. So this is basically what World of Tanks was designed for, because our hope was that we were supposed to do huge wars, large-scale wars, and therefore we had to support it Yes, indeed, plans were like that. We planned to have large-scale wars. But then the solution to optimize it for one processor was impossible. By the fall last year, it was clear that we can do away with one core only, because once many people participated in the game, we understood that the game was different. So step by step, it became from 100 by 100 prototype to 60 by 60 prototype. Easy calculations allowed us to assume that one battle requires one core. Therefore, we decided to discard the scaling model and so as to shrink it to one processor and optimize the algorithm by vision and a wide range of other parameters. This is how we managed to optimize production, and this allowed us not to check all sorts of cases. Well, retrospective aspect. Here we start to capitalize on our technical solutions. Once we have a perfect library, it is high time to make it compatible with the net library, and this is half of the server already. This is basically the idea. We had some more successful solutions. Just have the architecture, capitalize the architecture. So, retrospective aspect is capitalization of technical solutions. We have to incorporate those into the team DNA and to disseminate this information on various conferences and meetings so as to share problems. Once this is done, we start from step 1. If this is relaunch or rebooting, and we started from the very beginning. This is it for my part. Thank you. Max, thank you very much for this marvelous speech. Well, I got it, how to make proper games. Well, will you join my team? Easily. So we have a couple of questions. Well, as I promised, I didn't touch some technical issues, but if you have some technical issues, I will be happy to take questions about that. This is my question. You mentioned 0.3% of crashes. But during what time? So this means you had 1,000 of clients and 3 out of them crashed? No, the statistics is obtained from public tests. We have public tests periods when everyone can test the new version, like classic PTS. To us, this is 20 to 30,000 people. And we obtain the statistics at daytime. So we look at the statistics over the daytime, and we see how many games were ended in the customer's crash. So we see that we understand that this is just a test version, and some modes are not working in it. So, but still we had 0.3% of crashes, which is a good result, indeed, if you compare. Well, as for unit tests, on what stage are you in terms of unit tests? I just wanted to include unit tests and continuous integration into my presentation because this is the topic of my love. You cannot do a refactoring without a unit test or without unit tests. But unit tests are not a technical strategy. It is just a developing culture. This is the culture of the team. You cannot impose it. It just build it up. You nurture it. This is the culture of the team, the conduct, the code of conduct of the team. This is like we are doing reviews. When we do reviews, when the author does the review, when us are doing reviews, this belongs to the conduct of developers. And this is a different topic, which makes life easier on the development stage. But it's not a technical phenomenon. Max, going back, if you had an opportunity to process boys by several entities, would you have done it if you had the shooter on a seamless drive? Well, I tried to get rid of sale-ups once I realized how costly that is. Once I assessed our chances to need this thing. Well, it did not happen all at once. So when we changed the sale-ups, that generated huge pain. And we understood that this is something which is unacceptable for players. Well, anyway, it was too early that we made this decision. Just to convince people, not the technical guys who were in favor of that, but those who said, well, we will need large-scale battles. How could we do it with sail-ups? So, and it has eaten out 6 months. And that means that we started to press the QA, and finally we won. In May this year, the tanks switched over to one single sell-up mode, and now it's everywhere. It's paramount. As for the mistakes that you mentioned initially with British guys, what's the mistake that they made a technology instead of a game, or did they have any problems with architecture? No, just do get it correctly. In terms of technologies, those are better than the World of Tanks. But all the problems that they used to have 20 years ago, they solved by tools that were used 10 years ago, right? So they were at the front line. Well, for us, this is sail-up, and for them, this is worker. When physics is on the one hand and on the other hand. In Big WoT, we see only the result of the simulation. And this means that to transfer the simulation, you have to do it instantly to ensure no ruptures. In spatial loss, they do double simulation in the buffer zone. And therefore, just the transmission is just switching over the control. Next, they also enhance the programming technology of the games. I mentioned mistakes, saying that first they started with the abstract technology. They started with vision. But games are different, and you cannot make a game ideal for everyone. So they tried to do it, make it ideal for everyone, but very soon did they realize how mistaken they were, because they saw simulation 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, and the game says, well, you have an island 10 kilometers away. You can see what's going on. And that was... So they had very large objects, actually. Next, another mistake of them is that they try to do everything in entities. And sooner or later, this would kill them. Have to make it larger, have to make it bigger, go bigger. Well, in short, they could successfully correct these mistakes. Whereas us, to make up our decision where we have to split up or not, so we spared a huge amount of time. We wasted this time. I don't want to kill special loss because it's a good thing. It works very well in solving a number of issues. But I doubt that this would be a demanded area. I mean, clouds, compatible cloud technologies and unities. I doubt that the market will be asking for 3, 5, 10 more games, and there will be real demand for that. If you have an understanding of how to design it, do it first and then capitalize. Because anyway, you will have to come up with simulation strategy, with scaling strategy, with physics. Anyway, you will have to tackle the same issues, but in a different order. Do not make solutions first, redo them, and then capitalize. Just first capitalize and then make solutions. Not but once have I asked this question to different speakers, and I believe you were asked this question as well. What to do when you say capitalize the solutions and manager says features? You say productivity, manager say feature. You say scaling, manager says feature. Well, therefore, my capitalization is on in the most stable stage, when we have just some time to relieve, to stretch our legs. Well, this is the time when we want to just wrap up a specific game and then to start a new one. So how should we manage people? But that's not true about wargaming, because in wargaming there's a constant lack of people. We're always lacking specialists. And again, for companies, for wargaming companies, my presentation is irrelevant because they know this all too well. However, those who will have to be through that, then yes, my presentation is relevant, whereas capitalization, this would fit into this area. Moreover, capitalization would fail if the next game with a similar gameplay will be in the pipeline. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Max. I'm afraid we don't have time for extra questions. Well, and if you fail to ask your question during this session, so Max is available during the break somewhere outside this room. Thank you.
keep catching our speakers in the hallway and putting cameras in front of them. Hi, please introduce yourself.
My name is Samuel Ranteskla. I work for Microsoft as a principal program manager out of Sweden.
Okay, Samuel, so let's talk about games. What's your favorite game?
Well, I wish I played a lot more games than I actually do, so I have to go back into the past. Like, one of my really favorite games is Jag the Lions 2 from like 92, 93. I think it was made here in Russia, if I'm not mistaken. Civilization, always been a big fan of that. And then the Enemy Unknown UFO trilogy from the 90s. There's so many games, I mean, it's like impossible to select one. But they're all strategic games, the ones that are my favorite.
Yeah, you're obviously a tactician. That's commendable. But do you remember the very first game you've ever played?
Decathlon, probably on the X86, somewhere around 84.
Wow, that's... I don't even remember that one.
It's like you basically play Decathlon and you just hammer at the keyboard to go faster, like 10 different sports events. Played it like crazy. I was 8 years old then.
Wow. How did you get into the gaming industry?
It was by chance, actually. So I was studying at Uppsala University, doing computer science, and they had this fair where companies were meeting the students. And there was these two guys that they've started a game company in the basement, and they wanted somebody to write a BSP tree, binary space partitioning tree. And I was looking for my thesis, so I figured let's combine those. So I joined them, I wrote my thesis in the games industry, and then from there on kind of like just went on. So this was 2000.
But now in 2017, what's your favorite and least favorite thing about game dev?
I mean, I think the games industry is awesome. Great place to work, there's so much passion, there's skilled, very intelligent people. I think that's my favorite thing. The least favorite thing is that, which I covered in my speech a little bit, I think that we're looking a little bit too much at how do we turn time into money, rather than seeing like how do we educate our kids. I really want to, that's my passion myself, is like take this experience, make our kids better tomorrow than they are today. I'm a parent as well, so that's coming from that.
Well, that's a very noble thing to do.
I don't know if noble, just I think it would be a good thing for us.
Definitely is. About your speech, did you have any interesting questions that maybe stood out?
Yeah, there was some interesting questions, like if we look at mixed reality, what's going to happen with that? What's the dangers with that? I couldn't really answer them because let's see what happens.
But if you were a part of your own audience, what question would you like to ask yourself?
That was a tricky one. Are you sure that you're right?
Are you?
No.
Well, we can be sure 100%, but still, we're trying to foresee the future here. How do you like the conference?
Love it. St. Petersburg, great place. Wargaming, excellent hosts. It's a great place to be. You should come to the next one.
Definitely do. Say, if you had the chance to go back in time to when you just started working in the industry and give yourself one advice, what would it be?
Try one of your ideas out.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Samuel. I hope you like the conference. Thank you. We got another one of our speakers here at 4C and would like to ask him some questions. Hi, please introduce yourself.
Hey, my name is Eric, and I'm the CEO of the Do Dreams game studio based in Helsinki, Finland.
Very nice to meet you, Eric. Tell me, what's the very first video game you've ever played?
I guess when I was a little kid, my dad was in banking and he had a lot of business trips and he went to Japan. And he brought me one of these Nintendo handheld, like small games. It probably was Donkey Kong. So that's my first memories with gaming. And then I played a lot of Oil Panic with the Disney characters, so fond memories with those. Favorite gaming memories, well, I like games that I can play with my friends. I remember when I was in high school, we'd go visit my friend's house and we played a lot of these like sports games together, like NHL 95 and some F1 racing games. So I would say that maybe NHL 95 is the game that I have played most with my friends, and I have fond memories of, you know, starting after school and then realizing this like 2 a.m. and knowing that my mother will be very angry when I come home late.
That happened to all of us, I think. How did you start in the video game industry? What led you here?
I was earlier a marketing lecturer at this business school in Helsinki. And then at some point I realized that instead of talking about business, that I'd like to do business myself. I had my own startup for 3 years, did different kinds of entertainment apps. I was interested in storytelling and apps and online and social media. After that, I did that for 3 years, failed miserably. But I guess the one thing I learned was how to test concepts early with real customer data. Because when you have little money, you need to be sure that you're spending it wisely. And I had the opportunity to join an existing team. So I joined Do Dreams as a CEO. And together with the wonderful team I have there, we started with these mini games, eventually came up with Drive Ahead, which is our current franchise that we're developing.
Sounds great. Tell me what...
Okay. Yeah.
Just a bit in the camera.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So what's your favorite thing about the video gaming industry, or maybe just something you strongly like about it?
I think my favorite thing about the gaming industry is the community of developers. So traveling around the world, meeting wonderful people who make games, and you know, talking to people and learning from them. I think it's really cool how in gaming people are very open to share their experiences about, you know, the business aspect of running a game studio, management stuff, you know, tips and advice on scaling and growing a company. It has been very useful for me, and hopefully by giving talks at events like this, maybe I can give something back to the community.
Oh, you definitely are. Anything that maybe irritates you or something you don't like about the industry, strongly dislike?
Well, I think in recent years, like, you know, games are developed with data and analytics, and that's of course very important. And I think all the creative decisions should be based on data. But what I've noticed is that studios maybe give up quite easily on games and their communities. So we have found that if we really invest in the community and take care of the players by making regular updates to the game, thinking of the game not as a product but as a service, then the community will support you through difficult times.
What trends do you think are going to persist or maybe appear anew in like a 10 years time? Let's make a prediction.
Oh, that's a very tricky question. So with everything developing so fast, I guess it's really difficult to say. I'm very excited about AR. So our studio, we launched our first augmented reality game, Drive Ahead Mini Golf, just yesterday. So I'm very interested in seeing how this market will develop in the next year or two. If you look at 10-year perspective, then maybe games will be everywhere. Maybe like your glasses could be a platform for playing games.
I'd love that.
Yeah. So maybe, you know, like it will be very interesting to see what kind of sessioning games will have when people could basically be playing all the time.
What do you think is more important in a game, like one of its aspects, the ever-discussed questions, the graphics, the gameplay, the game design, the storytelling maybe?
We usually start with a fun core gameplay. So, of course, we want to make fun, cool games. But we found that that's not enough. So you need to make sure that your players have a reason to return to the game often, and they want to return with their friends. So I think planning this progression and making sure that there are some kind of events like live operations, I think that's very important. And though everybody knows monetization is important, like just thinking of the path the player takes in the game and when are they presented with opportunities to spend money or watch videos or do something like that, like connecting the revenue model with making the game experience better. I think that's very crucial.
Do you have a vision of a video game you'd like to create if you weren't restricted in absolutely no way, like financially, creatively?
There's only one right answer to this, and that is that if we would have no financial restrictions, we would be doing the exact same thing that we're doing now. So I believe that the format that we have, developing games with minimum risk and investment, testing concepts early with players, and launching games thanks to this wonderful, large and active community that we have with Drive Ahead, is the way that we would want to do it, regardless of what kind of budget we have.
Sounds fair. Let's come back to the real world for a moment. What do you think about St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg is a wonderful place. We've been blessed by wonderful weather this time. I heard from the locals that we're very lucky to enjoy this nice weather. I've had the opportunity to visit St. Petersburg 3 times during the last year for a couple of events, and I'm always excited to meet the local developers. Our Drive Ahead game on Android, Russia is the largest market for us, and this is something that we want to understand better, like why people like the game here, and see how we as a studio could be more present in Russia and be closer to our fans, the players, on Russian social media. So that's why I'm always interested to visit Russia and meet people if I have the chance.
Well, now you have the chance, another one, at this event 4C, and what do you think about it?
I've had a chance to talk at many international events in China and the US, GDC, and places in Europe. I think 4C is the best organized event I've ever been to. You guys are taking really good care of the guests, and the lineup is awesome. So I'm giving a talk myself, but the rest of the time I have a full schedule of listening to presentations. So usually when I go to these international conferences, I'm quite tied up with meeting partners, but here I'm really going to enjoy going to the talks myself and hearing what the experiences people share.
And if you were interviewing yourself right now, what question would you like to ask yourself?
What question would I like to ask myself? I'd probably ask that, why do I have this wonderful beard?
Why do you?
Well, I'll tell you guys a secret. So I'm actually the great-grandson of Santa Claus. And that's why I have this beard, and Santa Claus said to me that you have to learn how to bring people of the world joy. So that's why for the next about 200 years I'm going to be the CEO of the Do Dreams game studio. And one day, in about 200 years, when my beard is all white, then I will become the next Santa Claus.
Really looking forward to it, and from the presents from you. What are you looking forward to? What's maybe the speech that you'd like to hear most? Anything specific?
I love all these demos and case studies that people do. I really like the talks where people go through some project and go through their experiences. So I have several of those in my schedule.
Great, sounds exciting. And now children all over the world are excited for a new Santa. And I hope you have a good time here. Thank you.
Thank you.